Tova Wang. I have been doing voting rights and elections for 23 years. I now do it from the Harvard Kennedy School, and I'm really thrilled to be joined by my partner in the work that we're going to talk about in terms of what sports franchises can do with election administrators, by Scott Pioli, who is my partner in this work and also my friend. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him, and then we're going to just sort of talk about the things that he's done around this issue and some things that we've been working on together as well. Where to begin? Scott was the vice president of the New England Patriots, general manager of the Kansas City Chiefs, assistant general manager of the Atlanta Falcons, 5 Super Bowls, on and on and on with his accomplishments as an executive in the NFL. He was awarded the NFL Executive of the Year 5 times, NFL Executive of the Decade, and he's now an NFL Network analyst for NFL Network and CBS Sports. But perhaps as important for the purposes of this conversation is he has been a longtime champion advocate for equity and social justice, and has been doing work around those issues for a long time, including civic engagement. He's a fellow at Morehouse College. He's the founding chair of the John Lewis Institute for Social Justice at Central Connecticut State University. He serves on the Women's Sports Foundation Board of Directors. He's the co-founder of Rise to Vote, which I hope he will talk about a little bit later. And I understand that historically, at least, he's also a Mets fan. So you can see that he is almost, you can see what his loyalty is like to his sports teams. So I'm going to begin by asking you, Scott, if you were always interested in voting rights and social justice and civic engagement, and what led you to get involved in all this stuff?
Tova, in group, I would say that I wasn't necessarily as interested in understanding voting and access to voting until I became more educated. I've always been about civil rights and equity and equality my entire life. And my work in the civil rights arena is kind of what always had voting on my radar. And I'll say what brought some things to the forefront wasn't too long ago. So I always voted, and I was always about voting rights. Yet I took a job with the Atlanta Falcons in 2014. And in 2014, that was in January, I immediately did all the things I needed to do, including register to vote. There was a primary coming up in June of 2014 that year, which was my first year. I registered to vote, and they needed to do via absentee ballot because I wasn't going to be in Atlanta in June. So that year, my absentee ballot, and first attempt at voting in Georgia showed up in July. So I missed my opportunity to vote at that point in time. So then fast forward to November 2014, general elections, and I said, okay, I'm going to vote in person. And we lived in Midtown in the city, and chose not to live out in the country or out in a lot of areas where people that look like me lived. And in 2014, November 4th, I leave my house early, go to our closest polling station, which is a church in the basement of a church right around the corner in the middle of the city. And of course, it's about 30 degrees, in the 30s, overcast, drizzling. And I pull up and I get out of my car, and the lines are coming out of the church, snaking around the parking lot. And I get in line. My job required me at the time to be at work very early. So I waited till about 7:30, and the line wasn't moving. So I decided to go to work, and was pretty upset because of this, what had happened in these first 2 opportunities. And when I get to work, one of my friends who lived in the Buckhead area says to me, he says, well, why don't you just go to the Buckhead Library? Because you don't have in Georgia, you don't have one specific place that you can vote. And there's a couple of options. And Buckhead, even though we lived literally in the city, in the middle of the city, Buckhead was only 2 miles away. He said, there's a polling station at the Buckhead Library. Why don't you go there? So I leave work early, get there before it closes, and I can't even make this up. When I got to the Buckhead Library, I'd gone from this line of people, mostly who didn't look like me, in the city in the morning, and rain, drizzle, cold, to the Buckhead Library, where you were greeted, and they literally had cookies and warm cider for folks as you went in. And it was one of those moments that kind of made me think a little. And so then from there forward, in 2016, I voted and went directly to the Buckhead Library, skipped the place where I'd been. And all this time I was thinking about things. And Toby, you mentioned I'm on the board of RISE, which is the Roth Initiative in Sports for Equality. And at that point in time, I had joined the board when it first started. The actual CEO and president of the organization, RISE, it was Jocelyn Benson. And at that point in time, we were creating this program within RISE, a bunch of different programs. One of the things we came up with was RISE to Vote, because we were very focused on the fact that how much equality has to do with the ability to get to vote and get to the ballot. And during this conversation, I was explaining to Jocelyn, this one conversation, I think it was in 2017, how frustrated I was with the circumstances surrounding my ability to vote. And therefore, a lot of people's ability, the lack of comfort, the lack of convenience, the lack of shelter, et cetera, et cetera. So I just kind of flippantly said to her, I said, we've got this stadium here, we've got this arena here, we've got all this stuff built right in the middle of these communities where there's a lot of people that are marginalized in many ways, who don't have transportation, can't drive to the Buckhead Library like I can. Why aren't we using these facilities that are built with taxpayer dollars, right? The owners aren't paying these. Why don't we build why don't we use these facilities that are built by the people for the people? And she's like, what did you say? And it started this whole conversation. Anyway, that's where this whole thing started, and the whole concept started through RISE to Vote. And then we used our, the convenience of the people on the boards and on the board at RISE to connect with people within the major sports, meaning the NFL, NHL, NBA, MLB, MLS, NWSL, all the leagues, to communicate with people that had access to the folks that ran stadiums. So that's kind of where the whole thing started, Tova.
Right. And so the light bulb was, wow, there are these spaces, these stadiums and arenas that would be great for polling locations. And so you started down the road of trying to make that happen, which is how we met.
Exactly.
Through Jocelyn Benson. Because I, being a voting person, is already established, and also a very big sports fan myself, had been thinking about this because in 2020, I saw that a bunch of the stadiums and arenas were being used for the elections and for voting. And I got very excited because I felt like, my two worlds here are colliding, like my passion outside of work and my passion in my work. And I also lived very near National Stadium at the time. So I saw, everything going on there. And I said, wow, I wonder if this is having any impact on the process. There were 48 teams that had their facilities used in 2020. And a lot of people told me there would be no way to study this, but I figured out a way. And I started working with 4 different scholars from around the country to try and evaluate this, and talk to a lot of the owners, well, not the owners, the execs and some of the team front office, talk to you a lot. And we did a report, which I can make available to everybody, demonstrating how amazing this all went for everybody, for the election administrators, for voters. The teams loved it. And it was just terrific all around because the administrators had these spaces that were huge. They could have a lot of machines, right? And there was plenty of parking. The teams, you can attest to this, I suppose. They know how to make lines move. Like, that's what stadium staff are.
Yeah, no, Tova, to that point, one of the executives that we talked to said, this is brilliant because our job, this is what we do. We move lines.
That's right.
Move lines of people in and out of events. And that was one of the quotes I remember that you and I both got from an executive that had to do with your study. Go ahead, please.
And you saw it also just firsthand how well it went, I think. You know about what went on, with the Hawks and State Farm, and some of these other stadiums and arenas where it was just, it was fun for people in addition to it just being really smooth, and you could get people in and out very quickly, which kind of is the most important thing to voters. And so what have you heard from the people who are doing it in 2020 and to other people around the industry who have been part of this conversation?
Yeah, and I think, I hope folks do take you up on your offer to look at the study, or at least the 1 or 2 pager that have, condenses all the information. Because I think one of the most important things from the everyone here is interested in voting. That's what's important to us. That the people that we're going to, that's not necessarily what their primary focus is. But the reason that I think so many teams felt it was great, because it gave them an opportunity to truly live for a day or more the value that most teams talk about, which is engaging with their community at a grassroots level. And the teams were excited because it gave them another opportunity to engage with their fans and engage with their citizens within the city. And truthfully, the one thing that I heard was fascinating, I was hearing offline, was how folks were so happy to get folks into the stadium and to mingle with people that don't normally go to the stadium. Because one of the whole ideas behind this, Tova, as you know, was the fact that these stadiums get built by taxpayer dollars, but most of the taxpayers that help build that can't afford the ticket. So now they're getting charged twice, and they can't afford to go to some of the events. So here it was, for the first time, they get to see some of these stadiums. They're spectacular. And they're stadiums, they're arenas, they're on college campuses, they're for pro teams, they're everywhere. And I think what hit people in a number of places, and with teams that I talked to and organizations that I talked to afterwards, Tova, it was the ability to be engaged with the community, show off what they had, to maybe recruit more people. It was a fun event. But, I think another thing that was really important that came out of this was particularly the people where they had to set up. Again, we're talking about November, and I know we're talking about early voting, a lot of things, but if you're going to set this up in November, in a lot of places across this country, the weather isn't very kind. And that was what affected me at first to make me think about this. But they actually felt good that they provided this not only the access to vote, but it was in a sheltered space, that they were in a sheltered space, that their team mascot that was running up and down the line, shaking hands with his babies,
We have
some of them
pictures.
had
This is actually true.
Yeah, some of the teams had players there, had their athletes there. I know that I believe out in Las Vegas, the Las Vegas Aces, the WNBA team had their people. They're going to have their players there. So it was a real opportunity for teams once again to serve, but also do some of the marketing that they're always looking to do.
No, there are some great photographs actually of some of the Colts players in Indianapolis greeting voters. And I'm going to say, look, I mean, I'm a sports fan. And I have particular fan allegiances, which I hesitate to ever bring up in public because a lot of people don't like the same teams as me. But I know that I would be more excited to go to vote in these places if I'm one of those people who's just not that sure about, oh God, where's my polling place? I don't have time for this. It might be an extra encouragement. And I will say, and giving myself away, sadly for me in a way, it was, well, not sadly, ironically, Fenway did a great job. Not saying who I root for. Fenway did a great job, including in 20. Yeah, okay. So in 2022, they did it again. And I always forget her name. Like there's the Green Monster guy, and then there's the Mrs. Green Monster woman, which she has a name, and I'm forgetting her name. Someone can put it in the Q&A. It's very funny. And people were, this is sad, taking pictures with the World Series trophies and stuff like that. But it was great. I mean, it was great for people. And, again, the election administrators really enjoyed, I think, the partnerships with the people, with the teams. It's kind of something different for them. I mean, I can imagine then and now, it's sort of like, there's not a lot that's fun right now about elections. And it's very, very, very stressful. And I think that these kinds of partnerships, again, can be, I don't know, that it was a kind of a feel-good thing also for everybody. I mean, voters, yes, but also the people who put it together, including the team staff in some places, served as poll workers and
Correct.
greeters and all of that. And, it was, I don't know, I think it was a pretty amazing and in some cases moving experience for people, especially in a situation which will probably be worse this year where you're trying to recruit poll workers. I mean, not only to have the team staff there, but I would guess that more people would be excited about volunteering to be a poll worker in a space like that, around that, in that environment. So,
Tova, I'll add this here because one of the clubs that I know so what's happened is since then I've been engaged with a number of teams across different sports. And there's one team in particular in a state where they're having a great deal in terms of finding poll workers has become an issue for most everyone. And they have found ways to partner with, like, for instance, with this organization called Vet the Vote, which is a veterans group that is, that they're training people to become poll workers. And it is nonpartisan, and it's a group of people that really wants to see people get to the ballot and get there to vote. And this state has used that organization, Vet the Vote, or We the Vets. Vet the Vote is one of their programs, but it's We the Vets. And with that, because of the teams partnerships with it's an NFL team with teams partnerships that they have every year in Military Month, and where they honor veterans and honor the military. There's now they're using some of the other organizations that they have relationships with to actually exponentially grow the work that they're doing with other partners in other spaces for things like poll workers, as you mentioned, Tova.
yeah, I mean, that was one thing. And then I know, well, for example, just because State Farm stood out so much in so many ways around this. I mean, they had 50,000 voters come through that arena. They processed 50,000 voters in that arena in 2020, which is extraordinary. And, the feeling is, at least, we do not have actual data on this, is that it probably made the voting situation, alleviated the burden for election administrators and alleviated long lines in other places because there was this huge space. By the way, another point that has been made to me, because people don't always think of these things, but I think maybe election administrators do, is they have plenty of electrical power. You don't have to worry about, things like electricity. It's just, I don't know, I heard from everybody, honestly. We interviewed, dozens of people from teams and administrators and other people involved in this stuff. And everyone had really positive feedback. And I'll say one other thing that's important. None of these people reported back to us that they got like serious blowback, like on social media or, emails, any of that kind of stuff. There was no really super negative response that they heard back, which is pretty striking. And I should mention that Michael Hamner, was part of our research team, he's at the University of Maryland. He did a poll with the Washington Post a while ago, and it showed, I have this exact number, but an overwhelming majority of people who took the survey for the Washington Post supported using stadiums and arenas for voting. So this is sort of like for teams and corporations, because they are ultimately corporations, right, who may be leery about getting involved in anything, given the political climate. It seems like this is a way they can do that and give back to the community and be part of upholding democracy that's not really all that controversial.
Right. And you mentioned the corporations and the companies. I think that's part of it too, Tova, where I think now, as this is coming to another year, a number of the stadiums aren't team or owned by the owners that own the franchises, so to speak.
Right.
Sometimes it's their run and owned by counties, cities. There's AEG, there's a number of corporations, but what they're doing is they're understanding this moment too, and then they can use whatever. It's an opportunity for them to brand themselves as well. Again, in a community that wouldn't normally see their branding if they're not in the stadium for whatever event or game that's going on. And I really believe that one of the more untapped spaces is, again, because I come from the NFL and professional sports, we spend a lot of time talking about the pro teams, but there are so many. I was listening to some of the folks earlier speaking, and you're in areas and counties and regions and communities where there's colleges and universities. And every college and university, well, most every college and university has some sort of either arena or convention space, or even 10,000 seat spaces, some 8,000 seat spaces that are indoors that could, really help the circumstance and do some of the same things, especially at a point in time we're trying to educate students and younger people about not only the importance to vote, but voting. They don't. And as I've said this to Tova, a lot of the younger voters don't care about the same things that I care about, and they're a different group. And what this is all founded in, Tova, going back to your original question that she asked me about, to me, this has always been about equity. And this has always been about people from marginalized groups and marginalized, in any way, providing access and an opportunity that they wouldn't otherwise get. And I think that there's spaces and places where if we make, again, the space that they go to vote not only easier, but a little bit more comfortable, they'd be willing to do it.
So I want to just, before going to Q&A, talk about what we're trying to do this year, which is, make this happen bigger and better, right? And so we have started talking to teams and election administrators. I'm hoping that some of you who are watching right now will be interested in doing these kinds of partnerships with fun people like Scott, because that's who you'd be working with. To do these kinds of things that will make, I think, your lives easier and with the election and that fans enjoy. So what are you thinking about for 24, Scott? What are we doing?
Well, what's interesting is it seems like every 2 years, the pun intended, the goalposts are changing, and there's different rules, there's laws, and different things that are affecting what can be used, or if it can, or how things can be used in different states and different areas. And I think, I know what's happening right now is the NFL, because of the timing of the season, they're just getting around to what they're planning to do and some of the stuff they're going to ask owners to do. But then, I've spent time with Adam Silver and Kathy Behrens at the NBA. They are, if you have an NBA team in your city, in your area, in your region, the work they're doing is absolutely amazing. They, in fact, intentionally, the NBA and the WNBA intentionally do not schedule games on election day. They give everyone has off on election day throughout those two leagues, because they not only want players, their employees to be able to vote, but they want to be used. So the NBA is once again doing that, but they're making a much stronger push this year to encourage folks to have more arenas available. So what's happening right now, this is the time where people are really starting to mobilize and figure things out, where it's becoming a little bit different. The good news is that there's going to be early voting and more absentee voting to get more people to be able to vote. The bad news is that affects and impacts the places that would potentially make themselves available for it. And when can they do it? When can't they do it? I know, Toby, you've been involved in some of the discussions we've been having with one Secretary of State. They're trying to figure out, what, because of their early voting, can they have access to their stadiums and arenas in their city or not? So a lot of it is very fluid right now, Toba, but I do know that I would say that this year, as much as any year, each year it's increasing, and the availability and the desire to do so has increased. So I think there's a real opportunity for folks out there.
Well, and you have mentioned to me also, getting to your real wheelhouse, that the NFL sort of has their off day on Tuesdays. That's when
Yes.
everybody gets the day off, so that players and everybody else could be doing all sorts of things out. No?
No, you're absolutely. I was
Well,
just
okay,
gonna,
so I'm going to say the
I was
general
gonna make a
manager.
bad joke. When it used to be games were just on Sundays and Mondays,
Yeah, yeah.
players' day off was for all 32 teams would be Tuesday, but that has shifted a little bit with the fact that we're playing games more than just 1 or 2 days a week. So
Well, if you're not
for the
playing
most
Monday
part, it
night
does remain
football,
true. Tuesday's the players' day off, yes,
right?
and that's when they
Okay,
do most of their community service work, which that becomes big
okay.
again. So if you have an NFL team, maybe even getting ahead with their community relations department to see if you can have access to players, or if there are players that might be interested, especially younger players. Older players, they have the places that are going to be their go-to places for community service for the most part. Younger players are always looking for something to become their thing. So again, I just encourage folks to consider that.
I know that there are a lot of questions, and so I'm going to turn it to Judd to put them out there to us. And
Yeah, okay.
we have I've been joking with Judd, we're going to have a breakout room later to talk about sports, like other than this.
That would be a very fun breakout.
And you can ask Scott about, your team's draft or something.
And
This is a joke.
You can ask Tova about the Yankees.
You gave me up.
Well,
Classic.
so I do have a question. So so we probably have, I put a number on it, but let's say 50, 60, 70 election officials on the call. And, but many of them are from smaller jurisdictions. So they're not from major US cities. So they don't have access to kind of large arenas. But if you were advising them, hey, how can they approach their minor league baseball team, their local college team, to try to get access to their facility, maybe for one day, or if it's appropriate in the schedule, maybe they can even get it for early voting. What would you tell them? What's the short elevator speech for that kind of conversation?
Yeah, so I mean, it was also minor league facilities in 2020 in some places, and there are a lot of places where the minor league team, those are like that's where it's all happening. That's the spot. We also just learned that I guess the Aces in particular, but I know this is true in other places, their practice facility is apparently spectacular. So so that's
the Las Vegas Aces.
What did I say?
No, I was just saying the Las Vegas Aces, for those who
Yeah,
don't
the Aces.
know
I will say,
are.
the WNBA season is perfect for all this kind of work because they go from May to October. But in any case, there are other types of places like that where I think there's just as much enthusiasm. And as Scott said, there are colleges and universities that have places. And then I would just say, the fan base is everywhere. So if we can get the teams involved, even in the smaller places, that I think that would be phenomenal for people's experiences.
I would just add, Jed, the fact is, again, I come from a professional sports place, but along with professional sports teams, the minor leagues, there's minor league hockey, there's minor league, there's G League basketball, there's these smaller arenas, there's all these things. But to me, there's so many arenas out there. Like when I think college campuses, I think on the campus of University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, the center, they have a center right there on campus where they play their games. On the campus of Villanova in Pennsylvania. Most major college campuses have arenas. I mean, even I worked 100 years ago at Murray State University, Murray, Kentucky. They have the Racer Center, which is it's a beautiful indoor, I think it's now a 9,000 seat arena that's on campus. What I would say is, to prepare, I would first find out if there's an arena in your area. And again, it doesn't have to be a professional sports team. If there's an arena or a convention center, I think about Boston, in the city of Boston, it is the convention center in Boston. Find out who owns it. Now, who owns it isn't always necessarily who runs it. So sometimes find out who owns it, runs it, and is the access point, and then approach those people, because I think that's where a lot of the time can get unfortunately wasted or spent trying to find the point of contact of who's running the stadium. Like I remember that was a big thing in Cleveland where the Cuyahoga County ended up they ran one, but then I think it was AEG ran another one or owned, and so finding that information and accessing the proper point of contact. Does that answer what you were asking, Judd?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think you've kind of spoken to the central issue, which is you be proactive as an elections administrator. Go out and make the phone call, make the contact, find the person you need to be speaking to, and you know, find your way through that maze and figure out how you can use these places.
I mean, you know, and people see this in the report, but by the way, there's a 15 or so page executive summary. There's a 90-something page academic type paper, which I'm also happy to share, but you know,
I recommend the 15-page or the 3-page. You also have to look.
Anyway, you know, we did talk to a number of election administrators and the teams and have a bunch of sort of like, you can't call them best practices, I know, because every situation is going to be different, but a lot of description of the ways in which they made it work. And it was these great partnerships, and they worked together on logistics, and you know, everyone had positive things to say about it. I can't say if that would happen in every occasion, but so we do have kind of models for how to make it work if people are interested in learning about some of that.
And I want to add to this, and I think this is an important point, is you're right, Tova. I don't know I did not hear one piece of negative feedback from anyone. And I will say this, and I can say this factually, it was both sides of the aisle. This was not just one group of people that was saying, oh, this was fantastic, this was wonderful. I lived in Atlanta, Georgia when it happened. And the people in Atlanta, Georgia, including the person that ran their official, their election, were very happy. So this is, again, I think it's important to understand, especially you folks that do, I don't do your job, you do your job. And it's amazing work that you do, and it's important work. And I think more people than you realize respect the work that you do and want to help.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and kind of giving us some insight into this sort of niche area of elections administration and the connections that we can make to sort of prioritize our voters. One of the things that I've really taken from this idea, yes, they're great facilities because they have amazing parking lots, they are big and have internet and all of the kinds of things that you need to have to kind of run a big polling place or vote center. But the thing that really hit me is everybody in a community knows where the stadium is.
Yes.
And often you're not, when you tell people, like here in Denver or in Arapahoe County, which is just south, you might tell people, go to Centerpoint. That's a big place to go vote. Well, half of the community doesn't know where Centerpoint is, but they sure know where the local stadium is. And so that's a great way to sort of get to those low information voters.
And there's transportation.
That's right. That's right. Bus lines and rail lines, often that's because they're trying to connect that facility.
Yeah, I mean, in 2020, a couple of teams even paid for the transportation for people to come to the stadium to vote. So a lot of different ways in which these partnerships can work.
Yeah, that's outstanding. Well, thank you so much. I think it's fair to say that Scott wins the background award for this event.
I told Tova this. So I do TV now for NFL. So I have to have the silly set up. So I told Tova I may go find a closet to go do this in, but
oh, it's great. It's fantastic. I love the background. It's fantastic. All right. Well, thank you very much again. It's wonderful to have both of you, and really interesting little, important note for elections administrators.
And Judd, if folks want to reach out to me, please reach out to Judd, who can find me, and I'll see if I can serve you in some way. Please.
That's great. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Judd.